Welcome, everyone. I know that, well, first, thank you for being here, even though there's a parade and a farmer's market and so many obstacles that you had to get through in order to be here. So thank you. My name's Bryn Durgan, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And I know a lot of you have been here before, but there are also some new faces today. So just want to say that if it weren't for all of you, we wouldn't be able to do the book clubs and the author talks and the workshops that we do. So again, thank you so much. It means the world to us. Now, let me introduce you to the New York Times best-selling author that we're here to celebrate. She is the senior features editor at Rolling Stone and was previously a staff writer at Esquire, where she covered culture and politics. She has written for Vanity Fair, Marie Claire, Town and Country, and the list goes on. While she now lives with her family in New Jersey, she grew up in Sarasota and graduated from the University of Florida. She has conducted more than 100 in-depth interviews as part of writing the book we're hoping you're buying today. It's the intimate, multi-generational story of the Kennedy family as seen through their Hyannis Port compound on Cape Cod. So let's give a huge round of applause and welcome the author of White House by the Sea, Kate Storey. Kate's going to share some pictures and talk a bit about the book, and then we'll take some questions and we'll have the signing. So, Kate?
Thank you so much. It's amazing to be here in my hometown talking about the book. It's surreal. I thought a lot about the parallels between Sarasota and Hyannis Port, the 2.5 years I spent working on this book. They're both beautiful beach communities, and there are, of course, many famous and important people who lived and still live in Sarasota. But growing up here, I never thought much of them. I didn't know, where they lived. I didn't know much about them. Hyannis Port and the Kennedys, though, it's very different. They're forever intertwined. Everyone there has a Kennedy story. Let's see if I can. And speaking of famous people living in Sarasota, I actually went to get a coffee before coming here today, and went into Rise Coffee Shop. Have you been here down the street? And it turns out it's owned by a Shriver, who I didn't know lived here. We had a lovely conversation, but it just goes to show you there's so many people who live here who you never know. You don't know where they are, who they are, where they live. But this is the heart of Hyannis Port. You can tell it's tiny, tiny. This is the yacht club. It's so small there's not even a bathroom in it. And this is the meeting place in Hyannis Port, but it gives you a sense of just how tiny this community is. It's 9 square miles, and it was completely transformed when JFK became president and turned it into the home of the summer White House. And this is just down the street from the Kennedy compound. You can walk just down the street from the Kennedy compound and you end up there. So this is a glimpse at my last few years. I wrote the book during COVID, hence these masks in every photo. I got the book deal in March of 2020. Hold on. Let's see, back. There we go. As Bryn introduced me, when she said she introduced me, I talked to more than 100 people for the book, including a dozen people from the Kennedy family. On the right here, this is Max Kennedy, who's one of RFK and Ethel Kennedy's children. He took me sailing. But because I cover 100 years, I also had to do a lot of archival research, and this is me digging through one of the many archives in Cape Cod with my son, who's here today, who was very helpful throughout the whole process. This is us riding on the boat tour. They still give boat tours of the Kennedy compound. You could ride in the Nantucket Sound behind the houses to get a good view of them. So that's us taking one of those tours. But the book covers 100 years. It starts in the 1920s. This is when Joe and Rose Kennedy, the matriarch and patriarch of the family, first started visiting Hyannis Port. These are their children: Rosemary, Jack, Eunice, Joe Jr., and Kick. And this is them in the water out behind Hyannis. The Rose and Joe Kennedy lived in Boston, and they were looking for a place to spend their summers to get away from the Boston heat. And they went to a town called Cohasset, Massachusetts. They were rejected on account of Joe Kennedy being Irish Catholic. So they continued on summer by summer and ended up eventually in Hyannis Port because of a shopping trip Rose took there. They rented for 2 summers a house called the Malcolm Cottage, and then bought it and doubled it in size. This is Joe Jr. and JFK in the yard behind the Malcolm Cottage. You can see Nantucket Sound out behind them. The reaction to the Kennedys was a little bit mixed. Joe, the patriarch, was accepted to the golf club, which is why they ended up there. But the family kind of kept to themselves, particularly the parents. But the kids made fast friends with the other kids in the community. This woman in the flower dresses, if you read the book yet, that's Nancy Tenney, who was the neighbor who was really important figure in the book. She was one of my favorite people to learn about. I find when you're writing about famous people, famous families, sometimes it can be hard to relate to them. It's kind of, nobody lives like the Kennedys. This can be kind of hard to relate to them. But the neighbors, the people who work for them, were the ones I really enjoyed learning about and researching. So that's Nancy there. This is in their basement that they turned into a movie theater when they did the big renovation. They would invite their friends and their neighbors to watch movies down in the basement. This is the patriarch, Joe Kennedy. The family, of course, had a ton of tragedies. One of the first ones was the loss of their son, Joe Jr. in the war. After he died, Joe Kennedy donated $150,000 to the town, and he wanted to do something that the kids could enjoy, so they made a skating rink. So this is him presenting the skating rink. I'm often asked who I most enjoyed learning about in the family, and I would say one of my favorites was Rose Kennedy, the matriarch. Through all the tragedy that the family went through, Rose, the mother, was really kind of the rock of the family, and I found in a lot of books when I was doing my research, when I read about the Kennedys, she was presented as kind of cold and kind of calculating and kind of a little bit absent as a parent, and I didn't find her that way. When I looked at her through the lens of Hyannis Port, I found her to be kind of a private woman who cared a lot about her family, and I learned about her through the eyes of her neighbors, who she kind of eventually over time opened up to, including Nancy Tenney, who she became very close to at the end of her life. This is Eugenia Forts, who's another one of the neighbors. As I mentioned, some of the neighbors were some of my favorite people to learn about. She was one of the founders of the Cape Cod NAACP, and she's never written about in books about the Kennedys, and she was an incredibly important figure in their lives, and she advised them on civil rights issues. There's one public beach in Hyannis Port, and it's not named for the Kennedys. It's in fact named for Eugenia Forts because she was such an important figure for the town and for the Kennedys as well. And this is when things changed. This is when Jackie came. This is right after JFK and Jackie got engaged, and when I talk to people in the community, they really look at this weekend, and you look at newspaper archives, you can tell too, this is the weekend when this went from a small sleepy community to something different. There was so much newspaper coverage when she came to visit, and everybody kind of wanted to know about her. She was engaged to JFK, who was this kind of young bachelor junior senator from Massachusetts. And the family starts to kind of come more and more into the public eye when Jackie starts to visit. She was a very good sport. You can see her playing baseball here with Ted Kennedy. This is her inside of the house, inside the big house. The Kennedy compound is really made up of 3 homes. The big house is the one where JFK and his siblings grew up. And that was a peek inside the big house. JFK and Jackie, once they got engaged, they bought a house kind of catty corner behind the big house. And then Bobby and Ethel Kennedy bought the house right behind the big house. And they're all connected by their lawns. You can kind of, they say, run barefoot between the different properties. But there's no big fence separating it. You wouldn't know it unless you were kind of going right up to it. It's not, when you think of a compound, I was imagining these grand Sarasota homes on the water with their big fences and hedges, and it's really not like that. They're a lot more modest. This is the day JFK actually spent election night in Hyannis Port. He voted in Boston and then flew there, and I have a lot of scenes, a couple of pages in the book dedicated to election night when he's waiting for the returns to come in. They turned his brother Bobby's house into a command center. And this is the morning of the election. This is the only photo taken of the whole family together. Right before this photo, Jackie kind of disappeared and was walking on the beach alone to kind of gather her thoughts. And they pulled her back in, and then she pulled Joe Kennedy in for the photo too. And so this is in the living room of the big house before they went downtown for his big televised acceptance speech. Okay, there's a video that plays about half the time. We'll see if it plays. Let's see. Oh, nope, that's good. This is after the election. They put up these little white huts all over town where the security guards and the so-called summer cops, like Sarasota, they have the population balloons certain times of year. Here it's summer, so they brought out on teachers and people like that to be summer cops before the presidency. But once the presidency came, they hired even more, and they were kind of stationed around these little huts around the houses. All the people I talked to who live in the community remember getting little stickers for their bikes and their cars to be able to drive through, to get through. This is the Yachtsman Hotel. This is where Press Secretary Pierre Salinger would perform for the press that came into town. I talked to a lot of the people who worked there and who had wonderful stories of kind of the scene that took place kind of after hours there. This is Bobby Kennedy with his kids. The video that didn't show is the helicopter landing on the lawn, which is something everybody in town really remembers, kind of running down the street when the president and Attorney General arrived, and the kids running to greet them. Neighbor kids, their own kids, cousins. It was really, on Friday afternoons, it was a really big scene. JFK did do some official business also at the house. This is in his house was too small to really do anything, so this is in his parents' house in the living room of the big house. So I kind of love these men in their suits and these Rose Kennedy's floral drapes and the carpet, and it's just such a funny contrast, I think. This is JFK Jr. He was another one I really loved learning about. I talked to a lot of his friends and cousins. It was really important for Jackie to give her children a sense of normalcy. She talked about some of the Shriver kids would kind of dance around the house singing a song that would go something like "My Daddy's President, Who Is Yours?" And they kind of made a big deal about their uncle being the president, but she really wanted her kids to have as normal life as possible. She talked to the Secret Service and told them that they were not to be seen when the kids were playing on the beach or on the boats. Her line was, "Drowning is my responsibility," as it would be for any parent. So I got a glimpse into kind of how the kids were raised when they were away from the White House too.
That's funny. It's funny because she's drowned almost 3 times.
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen letters that thank you notes to her bodyguard for saving her.
Yeah. So she,
throughout the world.
yeah. No, it's very, very interesting.
It's pretty cool.
This is JFK Jr. with Sandy Eiler, who was kind of a one-man summer camp for these kids. He was kind of a caregiver, a sports trainer. I talked to family members and people in town who remember him kind of going from house to house and dragging the kids out of bed and making them swim behind the house before their breakfast, and bringing kids from the community to have enough kids to play football and baseball, because he was a fun character. This is a birthday party in 1963, so if you kind of do the math, this is one of the last summers that the president had here in the big house. Sailing was incredibly important. The first slide I showed you, me sailing with Max Kennedy, I had tried to talk to him for months and months and months and never heard back, and finally out of nowhere I got an email from him saying, "I'll talk to you, but it has to be on my sailboat because you won't understand the Kennedys and you won't understand me unless you go sailing with me." And it was a cold November weekend before they shut down the house. I've not been growing up in Sarasota sailing. I didn't go sailing. We went on the boat, but we didn't go sailing, so I didn't know how to do it. And it's really not an ideal place to do an interview if you've ever been sailing. The boom kind of dock, and it was side to side. It was very, but I did learn a lot about the families with sailing. It's incredibly important to them. It's a place where they're competitive. It's a place where they can kind of go and be contemplative, be away from the crowds. So sailing is very important to the family, as I learned. I also talked to Max's sister, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, a few weeks after I went sailing with Max, and I said, "Oh, I went sailing with Max. It was my first time," and she was kind of like, "How could you possibly understand the Kennedys if you've been just was sailing for the first time?" So I told her I would learn, and I did. This is Bradford's Hardware. This is a little hardware shop that's still operating in Hyannis, and the reason I included this here is because this was Sergeant Shriver, who was Eunice Kennedy Shriver's husband. This was his hangout. This is where he got away from it all. Hyannis Port and the Kennedy compound could be kind of a challenging place for in-laws. There's a big, rambunctious family, and it could be kind of hard for them to figure out their place. So Bradford's Hardware is where Sarge, there was always something wrong with the boat, something that needed fixing. He always needed to go to Bradford's for something, and it's where he would spend his afternoons, and he knew everybody who worked there, he knew their names, would come and ask about kids' birthdays and things like that, and it was a place for him to kind of catch his breath. This is another video that probably will not work, but I'll describe it to you. It's a bunch of puppies who were, oh, is it gonna work? Who were kind of crawling all over JFK Jr. No, it didn't work. The last summer of JFK's life, they rented a house on a little spit of land called Squaw Island, and that's the last place they lived. The family loved that house so much they tried to buy it. The family who owned that house they agreed when they first rented the house to the Kennedys they would never talk about the family. They said, these are our neighbors, we're never gonna talk about them, and they didn't for decades and decades. I met them when I was through the course of doing my research for this book, and I met them, we talked to them off the record, and they were very lovely, and they said, we decided, years ago we don't talk about the neighbors. And then right when I was finishing the book, they said, we've changed our mind, that we're proud of this house. We want to tell the story of this house called Bramblетide. Brambletide is now owned by one of JFK's nephews, Chris Kennedy, who invited me into the house and showed me the house. And the family that owned it for a long time said, we're kind of ready to share our stories, which happened a lot with this book. Anybody who kind of knew JFK is of the generation now where they felt like these are kind of the chance to tell these final stories, and they opened up to me in a really amazing way. With the Kennedys, of course, came other celebrities. This is Frank Sinatra and Mia Farrow. This is after JFK's death. Frank Sinatra was very close friends with Joe Kennedy, the patriarch. I have a few scenes in the book with Frank in them, kind of rambunctious stories of him partying with Joe Kennedy. But this is Frank, and at his time, the young girlfriend, Mia Farrow, parked their yacht behind the Kennedy compound to come pay their respects to Joe Kennedy after JFK's death. The neighbors remember this very, very well. They all got out their binoculars and watched the whole thing happen, and we're very, very excited to tell me their memories. This brings us up to the 80s. The 80s was, there were two very big celebrity weddings in Hyannis Port in the 80s. Was Caroline Kennedy got married in the 80s, and this is the wedding of Maria Shriver and Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is Andy Warhol and his date Grace Jones. They arrived very late. They made a scene. Andy wrote in his diaries that night that he'd never seen a scene like this in a church before. It was really, the 80s were the era where this family went from kind of an important political family to really, truly a family of celebrities, and brought their kind of celebrity friends along with them. And this is another one where neighbors, kind of the celebrity sightings of it all was really exciting for them. This is JFK Jr. Again, after JFK died, JFK Jr. and his sister Caroline continued to go there with their mother until Jackie bought a house on Martha's Vineyard. And then really, John is the one who kind of, not officially, but kind of in practice, took over the house, spent a lot of time there with his friends. I talked to a lot of his friends who would come to visit on the weekends from New York. John had a magazine called George Magazine in the 90s, which is actually what led me to write this book, as I wrote a piece about George Magazine and met a lot of John's friends. But yeah, Hyannis Port was a place that was really important to him, and his death, when his disappearance when his plane went down, was another very big event for the family and for the community. He was very close to a lot of members of the community, and it was a really awful time in the 90s when he died. He was on his way to Hyannis Port when his plane went down. So this brings us to today. The Kennedys continue to go to Hyannis Port. It's hard to put an exact number to it because a lot of them rent houses or kind of share houses with one another. But I would say there are about between 10 and 12 Kennedy houses in Hyannis Port now. And when I started working on this book, I was kind of curious. It's a place where people kind of go to see Kennedys. There's a museum there. There are the boat tours, as I mentioned. And Cape Cod's a big place. I was kind of curious, why here? Why not, why go to this place where people come to see you? Why not go to a place where you might have more privacy? And the answer was really simple. The answer was, this is where our family is. So the family that goes there, they don't all go there. It's an enormous family, proven by the fact that one of them lives here in Sarasota. But the ones that go there and spend a lot of time there, those are the cousins that are really close. Which I found very, as a parent myself, I found very relatable. It's, wanting your family to go to a place where you have such a rich history and where they can be with their cousins is really quite special. And they have a lot of the same traditions. This is a Thanksgiving weekend sale that they do every year, all bundled up. And this is them, they continue to play touch football on the lawn on Thanksgiving as well. This is out behind the big house. And I think that's it. I want to leave plenty of time for any questions that anybody might have as well. Yes.
It seems like in the early days, a lot of the people who lived in Hyannis Port were kind of maybe not thrilled about the circus that the Kennedys brought. I'm kind of curious what the reception has been in Hyannis Port to the book. They've kind of brought some additional attention to that.
Yeah, it's different now. It's definitely different today. I would say it's calmed down. And I kind of wondered that too. I wondered if it would be like, oh, here we go again. But that was really not the reaction I got from people. I think at this point they're so used to it, and there's nothing that will ever match the years of the 1960s and the 80s when all these celebrities came. So they were really, at first, when I first started working on the book, I got a lot of no's and a lot of non-responses, and a lot of people ignored emails, and that happens with every piece of reporting. But kind of the more I talked to people, the more I was introduced to people either spending time there in the summers or via email and things like that. And people were really excited to share their stories. As I mentioned, it was, for some of them, they felt like this was the last time, particularly people who knew that JFK generation. They felt like this is our last chance to tell these stories, and they felt like Hyannis Port had never really had its chance to tell their side of the story, and so I think that's why they wanted to open up. Yes?
Have you seen the inside of the house recently?
Yeah, not the big house. The big house, as I mentioned, I wrote the book in 2020 to 2022, so it was closed. It's closed anyway, but it was very closed during those 2 years. But there are, on the big house, on the Kennedy compound property, I saw three houses. So one of the garage has been turned into a house. Patrick and Amy Kennedy lived there, so they took me on a tour there. Ethel Kennedy continues to live in the house she shared with Bobby Kennedy. So I didn't speak to Ethel, but I spoke to her daughter on that property. And then the president's house is owned by one of Ted Kennedy's children. So I saw most of the properties and kind of was able to walk around without going into the big house.
I went into Big House when I was in the 80s, I think.
But yeah, what did you think of it?
I thought that same curtain pattern that's on the wallpaper, that goes through the whole first floor of the house.
Yeah.
As you go up the stairs, every kid has a picture on each tread of the stairs, just like you would in any normal household. But it was huge, and it was very 60s, very 60s, 70s.
Yeah, kind of frozen in time.
It hadn't been redone in the 80s. I was surprised by that.
Yeah.
It was Rose Kennedy's 100th birthday.
Oh,
so
cool.
I think she just wanted to keep things the way.
Yeah. It's my understanding that when Ted Kennedy eventually moved in with his wife Vicki, that they did their renovation, but that makes sense that Rose's era would remain. I just noticed your beachcomber shirt as well, so that's a good Cape Cod shout out.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm from Situate, next to Cohasset.
Oh, okay.
Who lived in? Did they move to Cohasset first?
They spent a summer there renting, and Joe applied for the golf club and just never heard back, and that was understood to be the reason.
I see.
Yeah.
He applied to Cohasset?
Yeah.
The
Now
yacht
the
club or
Irish
the
Riviera.
golf club?
The golf club. Joe Kennedy, the patriarch.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Yes.
What does the family think of the plans to make the big house like a conference center, an education center?
Yeah, they're mixed from when I talk to them. They all kind of defer to whatever needs to be done to it. Rose Kennedy really wanted it to be open during her lifetime. When she talked about it, she hoped after her death that it would be turned into a historic house that could be toured the way the JFK birthplace house could be toured. And so, I think there's a little bit of it's a little sad that they can't spend the time there as a family they used to, but I think an understanding that, whatever needs to be done for it to be a learning center is, they're supportive of as well from the conversations I had. So a little mix, I would say. Oh, hi.
How are you? I love the book, by the way. Good
Thank
job.
you. Thank you.
Read it very much. I was curious how much you knew about the Kennedys before you wrote the book, and then did anything change as you wrote it and learned more?
Yeah, that's a good question. As a magazine journalist, I had written about them a little bit. I had done an interview with Jean Kennedy Smith before her death, and I had written the piece for Esquire about George Magazine. So that was really the piece that led to this, but that was really not a Kennedy story. It was more of a media story. It was a story about a magazine. It was a story about kind of the New York scene in the 90s. But that was what led to the book. And so I knew some. I knew the kind of the pop culture like basics of the family, I guess I would say, but I hadn't really studied them. I'm not a historian, so I really had to, which at times was overwhelming. I mean, there's just so much material out there about the family.
Right. Well,
So,
as you read the book, I'm like, it takes you down different rabbit holes. I'm
Yeah.
like, I want to learn about Michael Kennedy, Robert Kennedy.
yes.
But
No.
the family tree is so giant. It's hard to like know
Right.
it all.
Right, the family tree is giant, and there's also, I mean, the political significance of the family is just enormous. And I'm not a political scientist, I'm not a historian, so I would kind of have to kind of center myself and remind myself that I'm a journalist. So I had approached it as a journalist, which is just talking to as many people as possible, gathering as much information, but really staying focused on Hyannis Port. So not going to Boston. I mean, even for Chappaquiddick, I thought about that a lot, and I don't really even go to Chappaquiddick. I kind of tell that story from the perspective of Hyannis Port. So the way I told my sources and the way I kind of said it in my mind was, if this was a documentary, I would just have left a camera rolling at the end of Marchant Avenue for 100 years, and what would that have captured? And so it's really staying focused on that, I think, helped me not become overwhelmed with the enormous amount of material there is about the family.
Can you tell us what surprised you most?
Yeah, my answer to this is probably an unsatisfying one, but truly, like, the compound itself surprised me the most. When I first went there, I had not been to the Kennedy compound before I started working on the book, and I went there to write the proposal, and I put Hyannis Port into my Google Maps, and I arrived there, and it's just residential. There's just nothing there, and I think it's kind of a silly answer, but it kind of informed the entire book because it's kind of intentionally modest. That's why the family continued to go there. I have scenes in the book where people say to the family, "Why don't you build a fence? Why don't you do something for privacy, particularly after the tragedies this family had gone through?" And they very intentionally didn't want it to be that. There is a fence around the president's house, kind of because there had to be during the presidency, but they wanted this to be a place where they could, have relationships with their neighbors, where the kids had a sense of normalcy. And so that kind of initial surprise of just what this town, what this community is, what these houses are, I wanted to make sure the reader kind of understood that when they read the book.
Is there one person who was probably like, is there one person who gave you the most interesting information that you can think of? And was there one in particular who you wish you could have spoken to that was just not willing to speak?
Yeah, I really loved talking to people who worked in the house and neighbors. There was a man I spoke to early on who was the pianist for the family, who was hired by Ted Kennedy towards the end of Rose Kennedy's life. And just the scenes he kind of set for me of sitting behind this piano at this bench, of just these unbelievably famous people kind of coming in and out, and his interactions with them. He talked about Archbishop Desmond Tutu kind of coming in just one day from the pool, and this man just comes in and says, you're playing, this is lovely playing. He realized after who it was. He really had, this pianist was lovely. He had just such great stories. A lot of the family friends who were kind of lifers, who've been at Cape Cod for, their families have lived there longer than the Kennedys even. There were several of them who were really, really helpful. Caroline Kennedy I wanted to talk to, she does not really do too many interviews of this type. She's done a couple as ambassador now, very focused on that, but she doesn't do a lot of these types of interviews, understandably so, but it would have been nice to talk to her too. Yes.
You mentioned that when you went on the yacht with Max.
Yes.
I'm sorry, is he Robert Kennedy?
Yes, he's one of the younger ones.
So was that the closest relative?
I
Speak to Caroline.
Yeah, I didn't speak to Caroline, but I spoke to a lot of that generation. So Max, I spoke to several of his siblings. So his brother Chris owns Brambletide, which is the house that JFK lived in at the end of his life. So I spoke to Chris. I spoke to several of the Shrivers, three of the Stryver brothers. I spoke to Carrie Kennedy. Is really, people often also will ask me kind of who is the head of the family now that Ted Kennedy has died, and there's not really a clear answer to that, but I would say Carrie is one of the answers to that. She runs the RFK Human Rights Foundation. She's one of Bobby's children, and often if the family is in the news, Carrie will put out statements about the family. So she's kind of one of the more public-facing members of the family. So I spend a lot of time with Carrie. I spend a lot of time in her house. So there are photos. Those last two photos in the book are her personal photos that she gave me. So I spend a lot of time with her.
Is Carrie still sick?
She was well when I spent time with her. Yeah, she was great. She was really incredibly helpful. So I spoke to a lot of people from that generation of Max's cousins and Max's siblings. A lot of those. Yes.
If there are no more questions, we should probably get to the signing.
Great.
So we'll give another round of applause. Anybody